Welcome to the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. I'm your host, Stacey David. This podcast is brought to you by LMC Truck. Keep them on the road is their slogan, and they supply the parts to help you do that. Also, Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals and hot rods and enthusiasts alike. If you want quality tools, Cornwell's the place to go. Let's get to it. All right, I've got a question here from Ben from Iowa, and Ben has a 72 Ranchero. That's a pretty cool car truck. El Camino, as most people call it. No, it's not an El Camino, it's a Ranchero. There is a difference. One's a Ford, one's a Chevy. Matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize that the Ranchero was first. Most people think the El Camino came along first. It did not. The Ranchero beat it to the punch. El Camino came out in 59, Ranchero came out in 57. The Ranchero was not near as cool looking as the El Camino for a long time, but they caught up. I, like most people, have my favorites of certain years and the ones I don't like. I think my favorite El Camino is the 59. I just love the fins, the flat fins that, that bend out and the cat-eye taillights. I thought it was the best look of the 59 Chevy in the El Camino. It's just a great looking car. And I always call them a car because they're based off of a car. For the Ranchero, my favorite was the 71 with the hidden headlights, the GT looking one. Minus the wood grain down the side. I was never a fan of the fake wood grain. I just love that hidden headlight look of that early 70s Ranchero. Anyway, let's get to Ben's question here. He says, what do I do with this thing? He says, do I keep it stock? Or do I modify it? What's the line? What is the criteria here? Well, that's a really good question. I have covered this in a lot of ways. I'm sure this question will come up a lot because there is no one answer for this. But there are some great guidelines. So let me just go down the guidelines. There is a market for things done original that moves around. If you are thinking about keeping something original, you have to hunt that market down and see if it's worth it. For example, I always look at, is something collectible and what makes it collectible? Is there a market for that? Is somebody willing to give big bucks for something that's original? And if so, why? And once you answer those questions, you'll kind of have an idea. For example, an original Hemi Cuda. Okay, those are worth a lot of money, original, because they are historic, and people are willing to spend a lot of money to get them in their original state. But the people that pay that big bucks for them, they put them in a collection because they are so valuable. It's like having a piece of art that you don't want to get it torn up. There's a value to that, but there's only so many people that want that. The things to look at is, first of all, does it have historical value? And that can be, is it low production? And is it desirable? Or was it owned by somebody famous? Was it in a movie? Is there something that gives it a special pedigree? And if that's the case, it might be worth doing something back original. For example, a few years back, I found one of Richard Petty's early cars and got it off of eBay. But it was documented, and it was something that had actually raced in Daytona back in the 50s, and it had the pedigree of that. Lee Petty's name was on the title. And then Richard and his brother Maurice had actually done modifications to this car. And I had originally bought this car to do some stuff on the show and, have some fun with it. And as I got to looking at it, it was like, I better check with Richard and find out just exactly what the pedigree is of this car before I touch it. And I'm glad I did, because once I got hold of Richard, he took one look at the car and he goes, that's our old car. And he wanted it just like it was. So it was worth more to him the way he had modified it with his brother. Since I sold it to Richard, and he's got it in his shop and he's putting it back together the way it was originally done by him and his brother. So that was a rare thing. I would have gone the wrong direction if I would have made any modifications to it. However, Ben, your Ranchero, I doubt, was owned by Richard Petty. So what you'll need to do is look at it. If it's got a special engine or something in it that has a real value to it, you may want to consider keeping it all original. Now, that being said, this is where it gets dicey. It is your car, and you have to do to it what you want to do to it. You bought it for a reason, probably to drive it, hopefully to drive it. And if you're going to do that, you have to weigh that to this intrinsic value here. So if this is a car that you're going to enjoy and you're going to drive, then that comes first. It's your car. You can't be ruled by its history or what it might be worth. Until a person walks up to you and says, I'll give you X amount of dollars for that car, you don't know what it's worth. Only then do you really know what it's worth. So you can't sit and watch, Barrett Jackson or any of these auction shows and try to find a value out about your car, because I got news for you. Those shows are not really telling you the truth. There's ways that they can fudge those numbers, the people that are selling those cars, to make it look like they sold for more than they did. The other thing you need to look at is, what is your projected use? Did you get it to drive it? Do you want to keep it original? Or do you want to do a full-on showpiece with it? That's going to kind of determine what you want to do. You kind of need to look at what the value is if you keep it original. Look at the value if you modify it as a driver, and then look at the value when it's finished as a showpiece. And that will help you too. Now, when it comes to modifications, there are some modifications that I think people should do to just about every car, especially anything prior to the 1960s. When you get into your 50s cars and earlier, they did not have very good brakes. They did not have good cooling systems. They didn't have good fuel systems. These need to be upgraded if you're going to drive on freeway speeds on today's roads. Cars from the 60s on up have pretty much the same suspensions that we're using today. So you can do like a 69 Roadrunner back original, and you can still drive it every day. I mean, it's not going to steer like your BMW, but you can get by with it. A 1948 Buick, you're probably not going to want to drive that all original. You're going to struggle. Your braking's not going to be what it should, and so on and so forth. So when you talk about modifications, I would suggest, even if you're planning on keeping the vehicle mostly original, I would upgrade the brakes. I would upgrade the cooling system. I would upgrade the fuel system, because these ethanol fuels will chew up the old rubber and the old rubber hoses in original systems. You need to do that. You might even want to convert to a fuel injection or whatever, and then upgrade your electrical. Whether that's a full wiring harness or just fix any hacking that may have been done. Do those, you can pretty much keep the car original. But I would recommend those on just about anything. Hopefully, Ben, this gives you an idea. Ultimately, the choice is yours, man. It's your car. It's your vehicle. Make it like you want it, and don't be apologetic about it, man. It's meant to bring you some joy, so enjoy that thing. One of the big challenges that faces restorers out there today is finding good quality original parts. And there's a lot of places out there that carry custom parts, but finding those original parts can be very difficult. And that's one of the reasons you hear me talk about LMC Truck all the time. Because if you're doing a truck project, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, doesn't matter what year, they carry everything. They have got the parts, those little screws and those nuts and those little fasteners that you can't find anywhere, you can find at LMC. So if you have a project, even if you're not working on a truck, but you might need some hardware or something, that is Ford, Chevy, or Dodge related, you need to have an LMC catalog, because I guarantee you, they got something that you can use.
What do you think is the difference between like the 57 Chevy Cameo and what they did with the Camino 2 years later? Was it a truck chassis and a car chassis, or?
Yeah, the Cameo was actually, that's a really good question. The Cameo was kind of the attempt on a classy pickup. Keep in mind, anything before that, the pickup truck was a utility vehicle, period. If it had a heater, that was an option. The truck was a truck. It was for carrying stuff. It was not something that you drove around to look good in. You worked out of a truck. And Chevrolet decided, they realized that most people were having two vehicles. They were like, they had their car that they went to church in, and then they had their truck that they took to work. And they were like, what if we could combine those two where people could do it in one vehicle? So the Cameo pickup was kind of an attempt at that, and Dodge was doing things with their swept sides and stuff too to try to make a real classy looking pickup. And the Cameo with its fiberglass bed was a complete departure to the utilitarian looking truck, and the Cameo trucks were not that popular because the mentality of the American public was like, what's this? This isn't a truck. It's fiberglass, you know, the bed. It was kind of the start of that, but there was enough interest in it that the El Camino was born. And I think they were directly influenced by each other. The interesting thing is the Cameo was based off the truck frame, the truck chassis. So it was a truck that looked nice. The El Camino, on the other hand, was a car with a truck bed. So it was the start of what I would say became the SUV movement decades later. Because the SUVs, the first SUVs, the Blazers, the Broncos, you know, and those kind of things were all on truck chassis. The truck frame, they carried the same components as their brother pickup. Into the 80s and 90s, the SUVs started to take on more of a car chassis and get softer and more luxurious. Until we have the SUVs today, which are really a crossover vehicle. You know, they're car, you know, with some truck DNA in them. You know, people ask me all the time, what kind of opportunities are there in the automotive industry? One, if you want to be your own boss, you might want to consider being a Cornwell tool dealer. I mean, they're always looking for people. They have routes everywhere. They're America's oldest tool company. They make the best tools in the industry, and they're a great company to work for. If you're looking to be your own boss, start your own business, and tired of cranking on wrenches, you may want to be a tool dealer. One thing that you need to keep in mind is if you're keeping a vehicle pretty much original, you have to drive it accordingly, especially if you're driving it on today's streets. For example, we have a 53 Willys Pickup that is all original. We just rolled it in here and shooting some things on the show with it. This is the original 4-cylinder. This thing is untouched. It has been kept original. And so we took it down the road the other day. Here's some of the idiosyncrasies of a 1953 Willys Pickup. First of all, the brakes ain't so great. In other words, you have to really lay into it. There's no power or anything. The truck will stop, but you got to lay into it a lot harder than you ever have. You got a lot of play in the pedal, and you can't do these last-second panic stops. You just don't have the brakes to do that. The steering wanders all over the place. So you have to be working on that steering wheel all the time. You cannot be on your cell phone lollygagging looking out the window because you will wander all over the place. I've been driving clutch all my life. Man, I tell you what, those old vehicles like that, they will tax you. The clutch is hard, there's a lot of play in it, there's a lot of movement, the vehicle will roll down the hill backwards, you can't hold the brake at the same time. I mean, it uses all of your driving skills to be able to drive something like that. And with the 4-cylinder engine, this thing tops out at about 40 miles an hour. You don't pull out in front of a big truck because it's going to be all over you. You have to leave room to pull out. You can't speed shift this thing. Now, I love that kind of stuff. It makes it fun to drive. It makes it an adventure. Well, 1953, they didn't have synchros in first gear on that transmission in that truck, which means, for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, you cannot shift back into first until you come to a complete stop, because you'll just grind the gears into oblivion. So if you're downshifting, you know, you can downshift to second. It had a 3-speed transmission. But once you push in that clutch and come into a stop, you cannot shift into first until you come to a complete stop. That was a surprise. It's been a long time since I've driven something that didn't have a synchro for first gear in it. But that's the fun of that kind of thing. Turn signals always stay on. They don't self-cancel. Yeah, it was actually lucky there were turn signals at all in it. It's safe. You know, you can run it down the road, but you can't just drive it like it's something modern. I know a lot of people have gotten into some of these muscle cars. They've never been in a 60s muscle car, and they get into an original one, and they get out and they go like, gosh, that car was all over the road. What? That's a Roadrunner? That's a Camaro of that era? It's like, well, yeah, that's how they drove. Anyway, as you're getting out there enjoying these vehicles, make sure you're spending time getting used to the idiosyncrasies of them. Got a question here from Dominique. Dominique says, I'm looking to buy something at auction. Want to know what to look for. How do you know you're getting what you're getting? Great question. Man, I wish more people would ask that question. All right, the first thing you have to do when you're getting ready to buy something at auction or off of eBay or any place is you have to decide, you're looking for a project or you're looking for a driver, because you do look at these differently. So let's just say you're looking for a driver. That sounds like what Dominique's question is. He wants something that he can more just enjoy and drive. So let's dig into this a little bit. When you're looking at something that's been restored at an auction or whatever, ask as many questions as you can about the vehicle to the person that owns it, but you can only put a certain amount of faith in what that person tells you. Here are some key things to look out for. If the person says, I don't really know, I'm selling it for a friend, or it belongs to a buddy of mine, don't really know much about it, red flag should go up all over the place. Now, he may honestly not know about it, but that's bad that he doesn't know about it. The fact that he's trying to sell it and doesn't know about it, that's bad. Usually that's a guy that doesn't want to lie to you, so he doesn't tell you any lies. He just says, hey, you know, I don't know. Another key phrase is, that's just an old car. And also, I think the engine's got about 30,000 miles. It's always 30,000 miles. I kid you not, man. You go out there and people are like, yeah, it's got around 30,000 on it because 50,000 is too much, 10,000 is too new, and they know it's not that new. So they pick that spot right in there, or they pick about 70,000. So they want to make sure you know it's over 50,000, but it's under 100. So once again, these are kind of things to be careful of that the person can tell you. Now, they may be legit, they may not be, but it's up to you to know and to figure out if this is really something you want to invest in. Okay, so once you get as much information about the vehicle, now you start to dig into what you're actually seeing. First of all, is there any documentation on the vehicle? Do they have a project planning book? Do they have anything that backs up what they're about to say? That's always important. All right, so now you're going after the overall look. How does the vehicle look to you? Is the paint good? Is it got a good stance? What's the composition of the build? Does it make sense? Is it like half original and half restored? And does it look like pieces were just added? Look at the vehicle and you'll be able to tell if it's been kind of hacked together by a flipper. Okay, so once you get past that, now you start to dig a little deeper. Let's go into the motor and drivetrain. Is there any documentation to it on what's been done to it, how long ago, anything like that? Are there leaks? You know, look for leaks around the engine and, you know, oil leaks. Look at the exhaust. You know, you'll be able to tell if it's been running rich. Have the guy start it up. Is there signs of jerry rigging? And this is always a good thing for me. Look around the throttle shafts and the cables and the springs, because those are the areas where a guy will usually get in and get in a hurry, and they won't do those right. If you're looking at a vehicle and it's got a coat hanger for a throttle to cable, there's some jerry rigging going on there. You're just finding the little stuff. You have no idea what else has been hacked on this thing. So let that just be kind of an indicator of what you're looking at. Once you've looked at that, look at the suspension. How's the thing sitting? Is there rubbing? Look at the tires. Have the tires rubbed? Is there weird wear patterns on the tire that would indicate alignment that is out? How's the caster and camber? You know, is it towed in? Is it towed out? You know, you'll be able to tell that stuff. Does it look like it's sitting level? Does it look cockeyed? You can pick up on all this stuff. You can tell if somebody's been in there. Look at the bolts. You know, if they're crusty and nasty, but the vehicle is being touted as a ground-up restoration, but you're seeing original chassis bolts and things, has not been a full ground up. Those would have been cleaned up and either replaced or completely redone, sandblasted, and painted. Now go into the interior. To me, when I look at interiors, paint and interior is what people will clean up and make look good. So I start to really look for details in an interior. The edges of the door panels, how do they look? Do the colors match? Does the color on the carpet, is it consistent? Because a lot of these guys will paint the carpets or they'll repaint panels, but they won't do them all. Look for the edges, look for cracks around where the screw holes are. Just things that would indicate a little more wear and tear, just so you know. You'll be able to tell if these things have been apart. These cars will talk to you if you listen to them. They'll scream out, hey, here's what's happened to me, help me, help me. But you gotta have ears to hear it. On the interior, you know, look at the gauges. Do the gauges work? Are they foggy? Have they been worked on? Does the wiring seem to work right? Is the key loose? You know, those kind of things. Then I go out to the paint, and obviously most people try to get paint shiny, and they think that that does it. And what you want to do is look deeper than that. Look down the body, see if there's waves in the body. Ask if there's been a repaint, but you'll be able to tell if there's been a repaint or not. Look in the door jambs, you know, look for orange peel, you know, look for waviness in the body. Those are the first things you look at. But one of the main areas that I look at on a vehicle is the weather stripping. I know that may sound crazy, but to me the weather stripping is almost like taking the pulse of a vehicle, and here's why. When a guy usually gets a vehicle and wants to just flip it, They don't want to pull the weather stripping off because they don't want to find out what's underneath it, and generally it pulls up the paint. So you have to repaint the vehicle. They don't want to do all that. That gets into restoration work. So they'll tape around old weather stripping, or they'll get overspray on it, or they'll jerry rig it, or they'll put some silicone around it or something like that. And it'll talk to you, man. You'll be able to tell the bumpers under the hood, they'll be crushed down, because that's one of those minute detail things that a restorer will not overlook, but a flipper will. So look at the weather stripping, see how old it is. A brand new paint job with original weather stripping is not a good sign. That means the car was just taped off and reshot. The edges and the fit and finish of things will be a big indicator between something that is a full restoration that you're going to pay top dollar for, and then just a driver that might have a cheaper paint job on it. Now, I'm not saying if the weather stripping is bad, you don't buy the vehicle. It just adjusts the price, you know, to where you can buy it knowing that you're going to have to replace that, or there might be some restoration work involved down the road. Listen, if a vehicle's been wrecked and fixed properly, no problem. But if it hasn't, then that's really important to know that, because that can get into all kinds of problems down the road. So look for buckled panels, look for bent flanges, look for booger welds where somebody's just welded something back together. Some of the factory welds are pretty nasty, so, you know, just because it looks like an ugly weld doesn't mean somebody's been in there hacking. It could have been a dude on the assembly line way back in the day. But anyway, hopefully this gives you stuff to look at. Let the vehicle talk to you, and listen to the guy that's trying to sell it, and then just make a decision on it. You'll do all right. Good luck to you, Dom. Keep in mind, this podcast is made possible by our friends at LMC Truck and our friends at Cornwell Tools. All right, that wraps it up for us today. It is time for you to get out there, start working on something, build something with your own two hands, send in your questions, send in your pictures, let us know what you're working on. All right, we'll see you later.